Hello, listeners of the Mad Scientist podcast. I am your host, Chris Cogswell, here with my co-host, Marie Mayhew, for the beginning of Season 2. Take it away, Marie.
Dude,
come on!
Now you're just fucking with me. Now you're just messing with me. Now I'm saying 1937. Oh my God. All right. Stop.
We're leaving it in.
We're leaving it in? All right, well, let's go. Let's go. In 1837, Hans Christian Andersen wrote a fairy tale about an emperor so exceedingly fond of clothes that he spent all of his money on being well dressed. He cared nothing about governing his subjects, ruling his military, or building his dynasty. His only passion was showing off his new clothes. One day, weavers came to appear at the emperor's court. They proclaimed to weave the most magnificent fabrics available with colors and patterns of uncommon beauty. The clothes of these weavers' amazing cloth could only be seen by the most rarefied and regal of men. Only those with the wisest of intellects, the purest of heart, and the most discerning of eyes could see the magical clothes from these weavers' looms. Needless to say, our emperor employed the weavers immediately and paid them immense sums from the royal treasury to begin their work at once. The weavers set up their looms and began their work, but to all the royal court, their hands crafted no fabric, just air. Day and night the weavers toiled, but the results were invisible to everyone. The emperor saw nothing on the weavers' looms, and he feared for the worst, for if he could not see the cloth, then he must not be worthy. So when the weavers begged him to be so kind as to give an opinion on their excellent patterns and colors, the emperor exclaimed with delight about its beauty. After weeks of work, the weavers fitted the emperor with his new royal garments. Surrounded by his court, all of the emperor heard were murmurs of praise and approval about his new clothes and their splendor. For even the ministers of his court could not see anything, but no one wanted to look foolish. So magnificent the garments were said to be that a unanimous decision was made to parade the newly couturied emperor in front of all of his royal subjects, so that all the land could partake in their splendor. The emperor knighted each of the weavers and paid them handsomely and sent them on their way. Clothed only in his underwear, the emperor led the royal procession into the bitterly cold winter air, through the streets of the town, all to show off his new clothes. Needless to say, you, dear listener, knows what happens next. But this old fairy tale raises many interesting questions about magic and the power that people see in clothes, magic that may or may not truly be there. From religious relics to fairy tales to modern-day popular fiction, the belief in magic clothes stays with us to educate and entertain. So let's all don our vestments of magic splendor, grab our staffs and wand, and dig into this episode of Mad Scientist Podcast.
That's right, we're doing magic pants.
It's the Sisterhood of Magical Pants.
Let's do it. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the Mad Scientist Podcast, Episode 2, Magical Clothing.
Oh, boy.
Oh, 2018 shaping up.
2018 started on a high note.
Starting on a giddy high note.
We should have started this episode with buttons. Magical buttons. Okay. Before we dig into this episode, Marie, you are now the full-time co-host of the Mad Scientist Podcast. I'm getting tired of doing this show on my own. It's a lonely show without you, so I'm very happy to hear you as a co-host here.
I am so thrilled to be officially brought up from the ranks and hosting full time. No, seriously, from the ranks, raised upon high. No, I'm very excited. I love doing this. I love being able to shoot the shit with you guys, and then also, I'm so excited to get more into all this different stuff that we have planned.
Yeah, we have so many awesome episodes coming up this season, dear listeners. So this is going to officially be season 2. Episode
season
1. Season duh. The reckoning, I suppose one would say. So how was your holiday? Was it good? It's a good time.
It was good. Of course, we saw the new Jedi movie.
Did. Yeah, I saw it as well. It was good.
Loved it.
It was good.
had some people in the family get the flu. So there's that. And, just generally Santa was good to us, did a little traveling and did a little drinking, did a little eating. And now, back on it. Back in for 18.
Back on the grind. Nice.
And how about yourself, sir?
Yeah, it was good. It was pretty normal. Can't complain. I like the stuff around Christmas. Like I like decorating, and I like food, and I like, you know what I mean? Like I like gingerbread, I like all that stuff, but I don't necessarily like the, I don't know. I don't
dog.
Yeah, like I don't necessarily like the whole thing of Christmas, or I don't know. It's never been like my favorite holiday. It's always been Halloween, and Christmas is always kind of a bummer for me a little bit, just because of like that's not no sun outside, and it's, you know what I mean, like But yeah,
so I was thinking about that. When you originally started, tweeting a little bit about that. I'm like, how is it that you can go from Halloween, which you love, to Christmas, which is, you're just like meh.
Yeah, it's just not the same. There's not as much anarchy.
Christmas is not known for its anarchy.
No, and it's not my holiday. All right,
I will give you that.
So this episode it's funny. This episode, I did not think it was going to get as deep as it's gotten, but the Igor has just, above and beyond this episode. So we're talking about magical clothing, and that's kind of a like very broad term, but basically what we're talking about is the kind of, I think when someone says like, you have a magician or something, or even like a wizard or whatever, these people are always depicted as having like a couple of pretty common things, right? They have a robe, they have a pointed hat, sometimes a staff or a wand or something. Usually they have a beard. If they're an old man, which they often are depicted as being old men if they're wizards.
Yeah, if they're a wizard worth their salt.
Right, they always have a great
beard. In
this
popular culture, man, you gotta have a beard.
Gotta have a beard. Cannot deal without the beard. And then there's also the idea of there's actually a really interesting history of clothing in mythology and in the world of what we kind of cover on the show, right? I mean, there's a whole range of things that we can get into. I mean, we're not even going to touch on the idea of like UFOs in clothing, like aliens coming down in jumpsuits and crap, or fake noses and everything. But there's all kinds of this stuff. So what we wanted to start with,
jumpsuit.
Yeah, the silver jumpsuit, all that
silver
stuff.
Jumpsuit.
Ridiculous. But what we wanted to start with here really was just the general idea of like, fairy tales have a number of regular motifs to them, right? And so Marie, you had done some reading actually from a thesis that someone had written on this subject of clothing or cursed objects or whatever in fairy tales.
So it's from an article that was written by a woman named Carol Scott, and it's called Magical Dress, Clothing and Transformation in Fairy Tales. And, we started to dig into all of this. Igor pulled up so many good things and got me thinking about like fairy tales in general. And that's really where you start to see things like The Emperor's New Clothes or Cinderella, or stories about a garment that somehow causes a transformation. Started to do some research and found this article from her, which basically is saying like, it's the idea that clothing are inherently magical, and it transforms like the ordinary person into a more powerful one. And almost like the effects of this garment can be somewhat impersonal, like it can be passed from wearer to wearer. But I think the thing that is really interesting to me is this idea of this metamorphosis, right? That somebody that can start in one place, like a Cinderella, or even emperor, can have something happen to them with the clothes, and then can all of a sudden have this magical event that somehow changes their lives, changes the culture around them, and has this everlasting kind of magical effect that may or may not be able to fit in sort of with what the moral universe of the story is.
Yeah, so there's actually some really, like, I would say we could probably just pretty loosely break up these kind of ideas into a few different categories, right? We have the idea, like you were saying, of the transformation of, like, you know, the prince goes from being a nobleman to being a leader, to being almost a god by putting on the crown, right? By putting on the vestments of God, of God's chosen leader, they become that leader. There's the idea of clothing as a way to hide your public self and your hidden self, right? And so we're going to talk a little bit about carnival masks, which is really interesting in Italian, sort of an Italian tradition from Venice. There's also the idea of power versus, you know, the powerful versus the non-powerful, right? Same idea with the clothing of coronation, or the clothing of the pharaohs, or even the regalia that someone trying to be seen as humble or a peasant or something would wear, right? Like a monk's robes. Then you also have the idea, my favorite ones, my favorite two ones actually, are the idea of clothing as a symbol for greed and lust, and therefore being used as a sort of punishment or leading to punishment, right? And then finally, the idea of clothing as a holy or protective thing. Now, so first off, actually, I would love to hear the Emperor's New Clothes, that story, right? What do we each take to be the meaning of that? Because I actually, after I had reacquainted myself with the story, it meant something completely different than what I had thought it meant as a kid, or at least what I had thought of it meaning when I was younger, I suppose.
Well, I think to me, when I read it now, I'm looking at it through sort of the lens of magic and belief. I think it's interesting because it requires a suspension of logical belief, which is what the story is about. So it doesn't even, to me, it's like the moral of the story is the comeuppance of an emperor who doesn't have his priorities set correctly to help his people.
We should actually finish that story. You said to your listeners, as you know what happens.
As you know,
what if the listener doesn't know, Marie? What the hell happens to the king?
Everything's fine. It's all good.
It's good. He's just naked.
No special counsel is appointed. No, I'm teasing.
Nice.
I'm teasing. That's my only jab there.
God.
So he goes out on his procession, and the people, again, don't want to seem, the majority of his viewing audience that are lining the streets don't want to seem like they don't know what's going on. So they are all clapping and applauding. And there's one small child who all of a sudden exclaims, "The emperor has no clothes. The emperor has no clothes on." And from there, that one child sort of stating that simple fact out loud breaks the spell, and everyone realizes they've been duped by these weavers who set up this story so convincingly that everyone, through their own vanity and need for sort of this acceptance, it kind of grew in this, almost like a contagion outwards that, that if you don't see it, there's something wrong with you. And it just took the simple proclamation of a child to have that all go away. So that's sort of the magic spell, and that's what happens. And then hopefully from there, again, priorities are realigned within that kingdom, and it's a more balanced, benign environment for all of his serfs and the royal castle.
Right. I'm sure it's fine. I'm sure the serfs are getting a lot better now.
Yeah.
So it's sort of a story,
redistribution, all that good stuff.
Right. So it's sort of a story about self-deception, right? And how these people, just from being within this social structure of this is a person in power, and you assume everything must be above board. And so what you're seeing, must not be, like, if you're seeing the emperor with no clothes, you assume, because everyone else is acting like he has them, that there must be something wrong with you, right?
Exactly.
And it's not until this child has the strength of their own convictions, or maybe doesn't even know any better, comes out to say, like, hey, shit's not normal. What's up with that guy's nipples? And suddenly everyone's like, oh my God, they're like dinner plates, and it's over. The emperor's got no clothes. Yeah, it's like
I don't know if that was in Hans Christian's. Let me go back and I'll have to check.
No,
my primary source.
He wanted it in though.
What
wanted
he did.
it.
It was,
I know he did.
written. It was written in the margins, and it got whitewashed. Yeah, no, I think that's a huge part of it. Is like the suspension, this willful suspension of belief. But on something so basic, like I think the thing that's so interesting about that is it's about clothes, right? It's about something that's tangible. And so it's like, it's not so much like, oh, you don't see that ghost over there? How can you not see that? And people believe in that. It's something that's actually physically on his body. And he still is suspending belief that it's not, that it's actually there.
Well, you know
and
what?
To me, that's the thing that's so amazing. And one thing that kind of fits in with that is a quote from Carol Scott's article was clothing marks the point in which the inner and outer vision meet, the point in which the physical self and the world touch, which I think is sort of this interesting, again, it's this interesting idea of the mask or the shell, or on the other side of that is your true self, is your true identity. And on the other side, and then there's the clothes, and then outside of that is whatever the environment is, or the world writ large type of thing. And this is the filter, this is the barrier, or the magic that can change one or the other back and forth.
Sure. Well, it almost sets up this idea, like a lot of these ideas are intertwined, right? But the idea that clothing is there's something magically, like we see this all the time in books on this kind of subject, and folklore generally too, that there's really something very important in the name of a thing. Like the name, having access to the true name of something, of some spirit in exorcism, let's say, or in holy ritual, or in, even in, again, fairy tales, right? Like Rumpelstiltskin or whatever that story is, right? Where to have his name is to have power over him. This idea comes up a lot, and in some ways, clothing is another way of, back before we had access to such huge amounts of clothing as we do now. Now we have like a gluttony, the idea that we have more than 3 pairs of pants. My wife has shoes she won't even wear at certain events. You know what I mean? Like, that's craziness. The idea that you would have such luxury that you could have a dinner wear pant and a after dinner pant. Like, you know what I mean? The idea of there being more than clothes for special times of day or whatever.
Right.
That is it's a pretty modern conception, right? And so
well, modern as in like, 1700, 1800s, the courts. Like this is, if you are able to dress for dinner, then that's a social.
Exactly, it's a social standing kind of thing.
Exactly.
Right,
yeah.
and then to not be dressed the correct way is considered a faux pas. It's considered like a social grievance or a transgression. And that kind of brings us to the idea of clothing as transformative, as showing power or not power, right? So one fascinating version of this, and we're gonna talk about 2 cultures here primarily. We're gonna talk about the Egyptians and the English. The Egyptians, there was some really cool stuff that was found by the Igor on the nemes, or it is the ceremonial headdress that pharaohs wore, right? And it's fascinating. It's like meant to be sort of, again, it's like a royal vestment that is only worn by the pharaohs or those that are considered to be kingly or queenly, the royal. They're supposed to be close to the gods. And in some ways it's supposed to be almost like a lion's mane. But Egyptologists still don't really know exactly what it's used for. You know what I mean? Like, they don't know exactly what it's meant to symbolize or whatever. But then we have modern day druids, or the Thelema Society, or even the modern day druidic cultures or orders that celebrate the Egyptian pantheon of gods and whatever. They'll still wear them anyways too. And it's kind of funny. There's a couple of quotes in there that were like, it's just the perfect headwear for all types of weather. If it's too hot, you can open it up and it lets your neck get cool. And if it's too cold, you put it over your neck and it stays warm. It's great.
It's very practical.
Very practical kind of headwear, I suppose.
It's a very practical headdress.
But so,
Yes,
the idea though of kingly raiments, or like the clothing
Yes.
of a king, or even the clothing of a god, has gotten more and more complicated over the years, right?
Yes.
So
yes.
so you were telling me the British monarchy has some intense
Oh,
clothing
God.
they have to go
So-
through.
In my research, I was thinking of the Emperor's New Clothes. I was thinking of Cinderella, and there is sort of this idea of the magical transformation happening within royalty, or within something that is, again, like Chris was saying, that is beyond the station of sort of what your working class people are. It's the elevation, and it's the clothes that really elevate a person to that level, or but at least sort of is the door opening event, sort of like in Cinderella, she is a scullery maid. She's scrubbing the cinders by the fireplace with her evil stepmother and her two evil stepsisters, and everyone else gets to go to the ball and she doesn't. And as she lays weeping by the fireplace, the fairy godmother bippity boppity boos that shit together for her, right? So, at least in certain versions. And that transformation of clothes, of her all of a sudden becoming this, this princess done up in this gown, and she's got the glass slippers on, and the pumpkin becomes the carriage, and she's able to actually go to the ball and meet the prince, is this reflection of her inner beauty, of the fact that she was a good person coming outwards.
Yeah, it's
And
sort
that
of
she is. Yeah, exactly. Go ahead. She's worthy to rule.
Exactly. It's sort of a way of the clothing itself is a magical way to transform this person who would not have seemed to be worthy of this station, and almost try to, to pull them out of their circumstances to a better realm, or, to be on the same footing as a king or a queen for the night or whatever. Right.
And in Cinderella's case, that it's just magic.
Yes.
It's a just choice.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
That this is what she should be doing. She shouldn't be being abused or as a scullery maid, but she should be in a position where she can help others. The interesting thing about that transformation, though, too, is, again, clock strikes midnight, she runs out, her clothes are changing back to her scullery maid rags, and she leaves the glass slipper on the steps. And that is the only way that they can identify her. So they're going around, they don't know who this person is, so she is unrecognizable without the magic veil of accoutrement that she put on. They cannot recognize her. So it's sort of this weird counterbalance. Like, if somebody is truly good and just, it should be identifiable no matter what. You should be able to see that and identify that and act in that way and have that be recognized and perceived no matter what. But that's not the case hardly ever, philosophically or in sort of real life.
Right.
And this is what. Yeah.
Yeah, I was going to say,
Yeah.
it kind of builds into this idea of there's this idea out there in like social critique, or the critique of, say, whatever, capitalism or American society, however the hell you want to call it, whatever. But the idea is this critique says that, one of the biggest issues that we as a society or as a culture have kind of put up and almost made for ourselves is this idea that if you are rich, you deserve to be rich, or if you are rich, if you are wealthy, if you're well off, in some way you're more moral, or you are chosen by God. And it's actually it's sort of a big attack on evangelical churches in the United States in particular, because you have in Catholicism you have this idea of like the Beatitudes, where there's blessed are the poor, for they are rich in spirit, or blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth.
Yes.
There's this idea of being poor. Being poor is actually its own. To be poor is to be closer to God, almost in the way that those things are said. Now, whether or not that's whether or not that's like a social reading of the Bible or these papal bulls or these ideas that come out later on as they're made historically by real humans living in real societies, that's a whole other question, and we could get into that forever, right? But
that's a whole other Marxist argument we could make. But seriously, it's a good point.
But it's true though. Like there is something to the idea that we do tend to think that we have almost two minds about it in the United States. We think that because someone is successful, they must be smart, and that success doesn't have a lot to do with luck or with just being in the right place at the right time or even being born into it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, we look down on people like Paris Hilton, who by all accounts is a very savvy businesswoman who is fucking killing it right now by making loads of money. But we look down on her because she's doing it in a way that we don't think is, I don't know, legitimate, I guess.
It's almost, again, going back to the idea of nouveau riche, right? It's not old money. It's not an appropriate...
No, but that's the thing, though. I actually think it's the other way. I think because she is old money, we expect her to act a different way.
Yes, well, that's what I'm... I think that's sort of the flip side. And again, that's almost like back to the royalty. Like, if someone is royal and they dress a certain way and they act in a certain way, but I think mostly, like, if they dress in certain garments in certain time periods, that is very appropriate versus someone who is considered, again, like what's considered quote unquote new money. And that's what is the weird thing is it's like that's represented through physical dress. That's how you perceive it. Like Paris Hilton, from, like you're saying, it's a perception. She is from what could be considered somewhat old money within American standards, but we do not perceive it as such. Is that kind of what you were going for?
Yeah,
I just totally messed that up.
No, sort of. I mean, I think it's almost. Damn it, Marie! Damn it! I think it's
the deconstruction, the postmodern deconstruction of Paris Hilton it is something that will rip people asunder. I'll tell you that right now.
Yeah, no. I think kind of what I was getting at is the idea that we expect even people that make money but do it in a stupid way, right? Like we want these like people that win the lottery, right? We want them to deserve to win the lottery. Like, right, like we think of money as like something you get if you deserve it or you should deserve it. You know what I mean? And so people that just like, so we look down on people that make their money from, you know, if you fell on a sidewalk and sued the city for $1 million, we would look down on that in some ways. But then if you invest it wisely afterwards and your child is raised in money and is using it again in interesting ways or whatever, we don't think of it as anything, right? And or we don't think of that child as then having made the money in an unscrupulous way. We think of them as, oh, well, they must be really smart or whatever. Or even just the access that money buys you, we then assume that, you know, oh, well, you know, oh, they went to Harvard. But in many ways, going to Harvard, while there are some very extremely talented and smart people who've gone to Harvard, in some ways, a lot of those schools, it's just like the pipeline. You know what I mean? You just get in because, you know, your daddy got in and you know what I mean? His daddy and whatever, right? Down the line.
Right.
And so in some ways, it's kind of an interesting, and I also actually think it's kind of what we do to Paris Hilton is in some ways actually a little bit what we do to Donald Trump too, in the sense that I remember being a kid and Donald Trump was always, and they talk about this a lot when you read about him. I think in some ways we treat Paris Hilton kind of like we treat Donald Trump almost, where there was this, so when I was growing up, I fucking loved Donald Trump. Like I can't even explain to you, Marie, how big of a hit his run for president actually was for me. Because I always it wasn't like
I think you're gonna have to try.
Okay, it wasn't like a personal front or anything, I guess. Maybe this is like too much. I always kind of not looked up to is maybe the wrong term, but like I liked the story of Donald Trump as a kid. I found him to be a fascinating character. And I think partly why I found him so fascinating was because like he was this businessman who kind of was like sort of involved with the mob, sort of involved with crime, and at the same time kind of like, I don't know, like kind of legitimate. So like I remember when I was a kid, we went to Atlantic City every single summer for like weeks. Like we would always go to Atlantic City. And
I love this.
Yeah.
I love this. This should be a treatment for Netflix, is Chris and the family going to
Atlantic City. When I was like
awesome.
when I was like 10, my Nona was like, she'd start giving us $50 and just be like, go play some machines. You're good kids. Like,
oh my God.
and no one ever, like, it was a Trump casino, so no one ever gave a shit. You know what I mean? Like, whatever. The woman would,
nice kid has some
yeah,
ginger
like
ale.
the woman would come up and be like, you want a scotch? Like, no thank you, ma'am. I'm 7. You know what I mean? Where's the arcade? She'd be like, don't worry about it, sweetie, and then pinch my butt and run away. What's going on? You know what I mean? Like, it was a really weird, and I think partly too why I like Donald Trump, or why I thought he was so interesting, was because Donald Trump was like, in some ways, Donald Trump was like the guy my dad wanted to be. You know what I mean? Like I could definitely see my dad's personality was such that he would have loved to have been Donald Trump. Like,
oh, wow.
you know, like a casino guy, again, like kind of involved in the mob, but not really. You know what I mean? Like all that stuff, all that shit my dad found fascinating too. So anyways, but there was always this idea, and you always see it too in the treatments of Trump in stories or autobiographies or biographies about him, where they say like a big driving force for him was always like his father was looked down on because his dad operated mostly in Queens real estate, right? He was like outer borough real estate. And Trump, because they were rich, was like in classes and schools and stuff with all of these kids whose parents were operating in Manhattan. And it was always almost like a class thing where, okay, you're rich, but you're not as rich as us, right?
It's new wealth.
Exactly.
It's
like,
unlegitimate. Yeah.
It's like, you know, you're Queens rich, but you're not Manhattan rich, you know? And that's definitely still the case. Like, you know, and I think because the threshold to get into obviously like real estate and run the risks and stuff in an outer borough of New York City, like Staten Island real estate, you can own a couple of houses. I mean, you'd have to be like a millionaire, you know what I mean? But it's not like the threshold to even getting into that game where you could buy a second property is not so astronomically high that you can't see anyone doing it.
As Manhattan.
Right?
Yeah.
But Manhattan, it's like you need hundreds of millions just to even, you know, turn a profit, right?
Yeah.
And so anyways, I definitely feel like that we have this kind of idea of new money versus old money, and one of the determinant factors of old money is the way that they act, the way that they dress, and their access to these things that were previously impossible, right? Or, you know, so
access to power, really,
exactly.
is what it is.
And in
it's
many,
like
and in many ways, the clothing that people wear is indicative of that access to clothing. And one, you know what, actually, while we were talking about this with Trump, one thing that I find really fascinating too is the kind of clunky ways that politicians will sometimes try to play down that difference of personhood, right? So like you'll see like Obama in like a golf t-shirt, right? And it just looks weird. You know what I mean? Like it's like seeing your, I don't know, like it's like if I ever saw my grandma in pants, I probably would have shit myself. I would have been like, what the fuck is going on?
Oh, because Nona's a high roller, man. I can tell that right now.
No, like, but see, like she would have never even considered wearing pants, right? And so if I ever saw her in pants, I would have been like, what is happening here? Or, you know,
what kind of parallel universe, dark timeline shit is this?
No, really though. I'm actually thinking too, this is like my PhD advisor always wore a full suit with a vest and everything, no matter how hot it was outside, until one day he came to group meeting in biking shorts and a t-shirt, or like basketball shorts and a t-shirt. And I remember being so uncomfortable with the way he was dressed that I could not focus.
Everyone lost their shit.
I was like, what is happening? Why is Sunho dressed like this? I don't get it. Anyways, So
No,
okay, let's
I
get
do
back to
think that
topic.
I think that there's something to like the aspirational nature, right? Like even if you are, again, you're skull remade, you're looking at royalty, you're quote unquote new wealth, you're always trying to achieve something. And again, that's seen in any fairy tale with either it's Beauty and the Beast. Well, it's even that Sleeping Beauty, Emperor's New Clothes. They're aspiring to something that may or may not even be real. Like, is the perception of what they're putting upon greater than what that thing truly is my other thought. But when you look at the actual royalty, so you had brought up sort of the coronation, and we were looking at, again, all of these clothes metaphors happening in fairy tales involving royalty. We went back and I did just look at like what royalty actually wore during the coronation, which is when basically the new king or the new queen is taking the throne. And there are so many different garments. And like, if you picture it in your head, like if you picture the idea of the coronation, you, even as an American, you kind of have you can get a mental picture of the ermine robe with the red velvet, the very ornate crown, and then the scepter and the globe, right, is sort of the most common. But I was looking at just from early on, each of the garments that they are clothed in has a name and a metaphor. So there's the anointing garment, which is like the first thing they put on, which is just a plain white garment, and it's just fastened in back. But then there's like the cap of estate, which is worn under, it's not an actual cap, but it's like worn under the cap. There's the cap of maintenance. There's all of these different symbolic things that represent the royal authority, and each of them have their own name and sort of their own volition within the ceremony. One of the big things that did happen is the coronation dress of Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II was a big deal because it was a clear break in tradition, but it was still this hugely splendored, beautiful effect. But it was a dress with a shorter sleeve and a fitted bodice and a fuller skirt. So it was making it more modern, it was breaking with tradition, and it caused quite a kerfuffle.
When you say that they have these like caps and things, are these made for every royal?
So they're made, so like the crimson surcoat. This is like, it is made for the upcoming royal, or the upcoming royal will do something, or from what I'm able to divine from the brief amount of, there's a huge volumes on.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Yeah, I mean.
So just skimming the surface, as a new monarch comes into power, they will make some sort of adjustment to the coronation outfit that sort of signifies their reign. It could just be, a different surcoat, a different cap, a different gown, or some slight variation. But it normally is fitting. It's like nobody's going to show up in a pantsuit, right?
Okay,
I mean,
but
it's
like bandage under the eye.
Yeah, it's a very slight.
Is that okay?
It's a very slight difference.
If it's bejeweled.
If it is bejeweled,
So of course, the crystals.
If it is subtly bejeweled. But one of the things that I found that I thought was really interesting. So again, there's a huge volumes on this whole look and this whole coronation. But the things that I thought were the most interesting, not so much as the gowns of what they're wearing, but what they're carrying. And in 1902, a ginormous diamond was found in South Africa, and this diamond was over 3,000 carats. It is roughly the size of I want to say like a softball is how big it was.
Damn.
Right? So it was presented to the crown of England as part of their royal jewels. And it's called the Cullinan 1 diamond. And it's also, I believe, the jewel of, or the star of Africa. And it was broken into many different pieces. And the largest piece was put in the staff or the scepter was carried by Queen Elizabeth. And the staff or the scepter is representing the shepherd's staff. So this is what she is using to look after her flock, which is pretty much, whatever the sun doesn't set on for the English Empire, right? So, and it has this ginormous gem, this ginormous, flawless, beautiful diamond in it. And then in her other hand, she carries the orb, which is the gold orb that's encrusted with jewels in a banded pattern all the way around it and topped with a cross. And that represents basically the globe, the world. And so these two things together signify she is the shepherd, the God divine shepherd of this world. And it's very literal, but it's also very it's crazy in a lot of ways, because when you start to look at it, you're like, well, that makes sense. That's a very literal
kind of
metaphor.
on the nose.
But it's also like that is what the king or the queen is imbued with. She is the queen. This is the monarchy. And what's interesting too is when you start to think about, again, this huge gem that was presented back to them as a gift from one of their colonies, basically, is there's a lot that now goes on with South Africa and South African diamonds and the process of mining them and the conflict, what's called a conflict diamond or a blood diamond, that this stone basically drives people to open warfare and conflict so they can make money and so they can sell it. And that's it's sort of this insidious, almost like a curse, or the magic that's coming out of this staff has this slightly tainted legacy. It's going to give her the ability to rule. It's the magic of the coronation, and she is now the sovereign queen of England. But with it comes this tainted history of poverty and of strife,
right? Well,
of all this unfair, these incredible class divisions and racism that will keep affecting her colonies, past and present, as long as that diamond has that value.
Well, in some ways, it's the ultimate sign of privilege, right? To be able to spend such vast sums on what is essentially a shiny rock, right?
Yes.
That has really no intrinsic value, right? I mean, we give it intrinsic value, we give it value by trading for it, but ultimately, it's not like it's a thing necessary for continued survival, right? It's not like, I mean, you can see why food would be traded for animals, or right, like you could see why water would be traded or whatever. You can see logically where that happened or why that occurred, but why gold became our form of currency or diamonds became a valuable thing, it's hard to see. And really, diamonds, it's kind of interesting. Diamonds really started as a whole thing during the late 1800s, early 1900s, by mining companies selling it as the ultimate sign of love for engagement gifts, right? The engagement ring with a diamond became the symbol, right? But it but really, what's kind of fascinating now today is that, we can make diamond in the lab, right? Any intrinsic value it once had. So diamond, for listeners, let's get into the science here of all this stuff.
Science some of this shit.
So diamond is it's gonna wait for Marie's science intro. So diamond is just carbon. It's carbon in a very specific crystallographic form. And so carbon is the most abundant element on the Earth. next to like oxygen, nitrogen, or nitrogen probably is next on that list, if not even actually first, maybe. But carbon is one of the most prominent elements it's certainly the most prominent in biological or organic organisms, right? So carbon is the backbone for all of the chemicals in our body. It's extremely important chemically, and it can take a lot of different forms because of its prevalence in chemistry, right? So carbon, you can see primarily carbonaceous molecules in the form of ash or coal. Coal is a form of carbon. Carbon like graphite in pencils, that's actually carbon as well. Basically, it's just really thin layers of carbon sheets. That turns into graphene, another very expensive, very useful material, or hoped to be useful material in electrochemistry and in chemistry generally. And what graphene is it's 1 to 2 nanometer thick layers of carbon sheets, and they kind of stack on top of each other like a deck of cards. And this is kind of the type of material that I worked with. They're known as layered materials, and they have interesting properties and things. But graphite and graphene and all of these forms of carbon are becoming more and more important. Graphite, not so much. Graphite we've had forever, but graphene, that thinner layer of carbon, those individual layers, are extremely important now in nanotechnology. But so anyways, diamond, the way that it forms is it requires very, very high pressures and temperatures and long periods of time. And so that's why you only find it deep in the ground in mines and things, right? And so in the lab, when we make diamond, the way that we make it is we basically get to those same conditions that we would normally find in the center of a mine shaft, right? So extremely high pressures, extremely high temperatures, and really pressure and temperature kind of go, as pressure goes up, temperature goes up as well. So they kind of go hand in hand. So really it's high pressures that's important. And so as you get to that pressure, we can really make many different types of gems nowadays with these kind of big pressing machines, basically. But the reason that diamond is actually does have intrinsic value, but it's not because of the way it looks. Diamond has intrinsic value because it's really useful in machining and in other applications, right? Diamond is the hardest, one of the hardest solids. I think it is, if not still the hardest solid, it is one of the hardest solids, which means that it can, basically diamond can scratch anything, but nothing can scratch diamond. Now diamond can cleave, it can break along crystal grains in the solid itself. So a way of thinking about that is like, imagine you have a block of wood and you can see where the lines go down the wood, like the wood grain. And you know how you can like hit that with an axe and it'll cleave along that grain? The same exact thing is true of crystals. Crystals can also cleave in that same way.
Right, which is, they do talk a little bit about that with the cutting process of whittling this ginormous stone down into 9 different stones.
Right, and really, and that's kind of the part of diamonds. That's really the part of, like, if you saw a raw diamond, you would not necessarily think it's very beautiful, or even a raw emerald or ruby. Any of them, they're cloudy. They're kind of hard to see. You know what I mean? It's just like it just kind of looks like any other kind of opaque, semi-colorful rock. It is the breaking and the cleaving of the rock into surfaces that can actually like reflect and refract light the right way to make it look like it's shining. That is where diamonds and emeralds and rubies and all those other garbage things get their value, right? And what's fascinating now, Marie, is you were talking about this idea of these economies getting ravaged by the removal of diamonds from them, right?
Yeah.
And that's actually a really well-known idea in economics, known as basically like an extractive economy, right? And so the idea is that you have this economy where someone else is coming and paying workers measly amounts of money to remove a wealthy or a valuable a valuable resource, and is then doing stuff, processing that resource someplace else, and then selling you back the result of that work, right? So a really good example of this is West Virginia. Companies from other states, other countries sometimes are mining coal from West Virginia. They then take it to other states to burn it and then sell the energy back to West Virginia. That is like a really bad, it just, all it does, because once the coal is gone, once the thing that you're extracting is gone, you leave behind untrained workers, non-educated populaces, like, because you're not actually building anything in that state.
It's not a sustainable economic force.
And a huge and one of the biggest, but diamonds are their own sort of big problem. But one really huge problem in science right now, and in engineering generally, that is trying to be solved, is the lack of rare earth metals, and specifically their use in magnets. So elements like neodymium and these things that you find in magnets, if they're rare. They're hard to find. They're called rare earth elements, and they are very rare. And so we are running out of them on the earth. And so a lot of research is going into finding ways to create magnets that use more abundant elements like iron and aluminum and whatever, sulfur, arsenic, like these weird kind of like transition metal alloys and semi-metal alloys, whatever, that can then make magnets that might be useful, for our use in like engines and all these other places, right? But so the only place in the world that has these rare earth elements anymore, in any abundance, really, is North Korea, which is like kind of shitty,
solid,
But they have access. I think it's them and China have the most rare earth metals.
Yeah. But that you need. It's like, I think the thing that always boggles my mind about diamonds is they can be utilized for certain things.
But it's for most people, most people aren't getting diamonds so they can etch their,
so they can run computers off of them.
Right, so they can
They're getting them to wear. They're a symbol of rarity, and it too is really driven by a marketing campaign of the De Beers a diamond is forever.
Right, yeah.
Right? So you don't just rebuy them, or you're creating this sort of false scarcity because it is something that is going to be kept and passed down through generations. And that sort of helps drive this inherent value up. It's a total perception. There is no worth to that diamond. Yeah. I mean, if you look online at the crown jewels, of which this diamond is now is one of the largest. I mean, it's still the largest.
It's still huge. It's still a huge stone. It's ridiculous.
And it is beautiful. It is phenomenal looking, but to me, it's just like, again, with the magic of it and what it magically represents at a coronation or in royalty versus sort of what that ex-colony or what that country had to do to produce it.
Right. Yeah, it's kind of...
is this huge inequity and this huge question of like, really? Is that like... But at the same time, like, you're almost, again, it's like the emperor's new clothes. You're almost overwhelmed by the need for that pageantry. If you look at a coronation or a royal wedding or anything that really has this investment in almost over the top, right? It's like, you're like, oh my God, this is amazing. Like, it is very captivating. And so I think that that's sort of the spell of the magic that it puts you under in a real life sense, is that you can kind of forget everything else that has to go into it because the pageantry and the tradition and the history behind just preserving that thing is so amazing.
Right. Well, it also
doesn't make it right. It still makes it pretty amazing, but it's not exactly right.
Right, sure. Well, it also brings about questions of, the beauty of nature, like in when we're old and gray, when we're like in our 120s, let's say.
So like next week for me, dude.
Don't say that, Marie.
Dude, it's all true.
When we're whatever, when whatever, when we're older, I had like a Porky Pig moment. I was like, when in 100 years, how are you going to be able to tell the difference between a real diamond and a fake diamond?
Well, there will be some other way of making one versus the other more important or more relevant or more powerful.
But I find it fascinating though, this idea of like, it's almost the imperfections in the real one that give it away, right? And it is literally just the price. Like, there is no way, outside of there being some a document or something proving, okay, this diamond came from this mine and it cost this many people's lives to mine it. And right, like, there is no clear provenance to like where this thing came from. If you just had 2 diamond rings in front of you and you had to pick which one was the real one and which one was the fake one, and you didn't know the price of the ring, you know what I mean? Like, I think you would have a very hard time distinguishing between the two in any outside, and it's the same thing. It's the same thing with a lot of things that we give inherent value to, but there really isn't. I mean, like art or wine even, or like, these are things that you experience. And of course we do experience diamonds or gemstones as well. And we experience clothing, but ultimately the value of a piece of clothing or the value of a thing generally is what value society gives it. Right? Because clothes they do not actually have intrinsic properties to them. I mean, of course, like a winter coat is worth something because it keeps you warm, right? But the difference between a $100 coat that keeps you warm and a $50 coat that keeps you warm and a $25 coat that keeps you warm, so long as all 3 of them keep you warm, there really is no difference outside of the social status that owning one over the other gives you, right?
Yes, or the construct that you are creating your identity with. Right.
And it's funny. I remember when I was a kid, my dad's family, my dad's like side, whatever, my parents got divorced, and my dad's part of that, whatever, was very poor, the whole time. And I mean, remains poor. Right. But, when I was a kid, I remember we used to get shirts from, like, just like hand-me-downs or from those stores, whatever, like Goodwill or whatever. And I remember one time I got a shirt that had Andrea Bocelli on it. And I was like 15. I didn't know who Andrea Bocelli was. I just like had this weird shirt that I thought was kind of cool looking. And so I wore it to school, and this girl who never talked, like this very super religious, like, she was nice and whatever, like we would, pass each other, and we weren't enemies or anything, but certainly she never hung out with the kind of, kids that I hung out with, right? In class, she was like, "Oh, Chris, do you like, what is your favorite aria from Andrea Bocelli?" And I was like, "What?" And I never wore the shirt again, Marie.
Oh.
I was like, I don't know shit about this shirt. I don't know who this guy is.
I'm not going to wear it.
Yeah. You know what I mean?
What have I done?
And my dad was just like, I thought it was weird that you took that one, but whatever. I figured, you know what I mean? I'm not going to question it. Who cares? But, yeah, it's super weird.
Well, you were talking about like how if it keeps you warm, right? It's like we were just vacationing in Boulder, Colorado, and we are walking around downtown, and like every single store is like, it's a Patagonia or it's a North Face or REI. But Boulder, because it's Boulder, also has, it has the more even the further outside of that spectrum for outdoor wear. There's this one there that I had never seen before, and it's Swedish, and I want to say it's Fjordraven.
We have one of them here.
Paul and I were trying to pronounce it, and I'm like, we have,
oh my God.
Fjordraven. And it's like the logo is this cute little fox, and it's very, and you're looking at it, and I was like, oh, let's go in, because I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
I don't know anything about it. I know what an REI or, Athleta or what, all of those things. Okay. And I'm like, wow. And I'm like, look at this, here's a winter coat. And it's like very austere and thick and just very like you look at it and you're like, oh shit, yeah, that's mountaineering, man. That's some serious shit. You're not just fucking, car camping, man.
Right.
That's a Himalayan. That's the shit right there. And I'm like, well, how much is this? Because again, like, I don't, not being the outdoorsy person.
No,
that would
there's no
normally
right.
be able to value these
There's no
things.
concept. Like, how do you know?
Right. I'm like, how much is this? It was $600.
Oh my god.
And I'm like, and I'm like, holy shit. And again, this coat was a nice coat. I am certain that it would keep you warm. And it had, again, like looking at it in comparison to sort of a North Face or an REI, it's a marked difference. It's almost like Swedish modern furniture and sort of the austerity of it, like in the plainness, the minimal, like, this is what a mountaineering shirt looks like if it's boiled down to the essence of the mountain.
Right, it has one large button instead of a bunch of smaller buttons. Like,
it's, and I was like, it's cool, but I'm like, it's $600. And I'm looking around and I'm like, it's a fucking racket, man. It's like, this is Fjordvegan. This is not. And it's like kids' jackets, 200, 300.
Damn.
Like there's no, or just, and I'm like, first of all, if you're mountaineering, I used to think, okay, so mountaineering is a sport where you need to have more skill than anything else, right? You have more knowledge and more skill. Because if you're going up a mountain, you have to have equipment, but you also have to know what you're doing, right? And it doesn't matter if that jacket is a $700 jacket or a $50 jacket, if it keeps you warm and it achieves what you need as a knowledgeable mountaineering person, then you should be able to partake in that sport.
Yeah, but you know what though? Like, mountaineering is such like a rich sport.
Yes,
like
it is.
Like, think about it.
It
Like
is.
the Sherpas that these people who are shopping at this store and spending thousands of dollars on, nano
The Finarganar shirt?
Yeah, like ridiculous gloves and all this other crap, whatever. They're getting taken up the mountain with a Sherpa who probably makes $50 a week, if that, and is probably wearing a jacket that someone in his town made for him.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Like,
and it's like, it blew my mind because it's like, I know it's definitely a wealthy pastime, but at the same time, should it? Like, was it always a wealth? Because then it got me like,
who has the time to like? Yeah, of course it's a wealthy pastime. I mean, who else in the world? Like, could you take 2 months off from work to train to climb a mountain?
Not necessarily.
I can't get 3 days off because I want to play, you know what I mean? Horizon Zero Dawn. And that's climbing mountains in a fake world. Like, no, it's not going to happen. You know what I mean? Like, of course it is. That is one of those like penultimate rich people things. And it's of course,
amazing.
I mean, it is. That's fascinating to me.
It's doing well. It's drawing air. It's like, it exists. That store exists. And then I was like, is this just like again, because like right down the block, there's 4 other stores that have something similar, but they're not the same. So it's like, man, the diversity of the market, that all of these places can be self-sustaining and can drive so much money in this one tiny town, which is not very big, but has just become so affluent, just made me scream, I fucking hate Boulder. I don't hate Boulder, but it's like, wow, that's very Boulder. It's not. I'm from Boulder. I can say that. I'm teasing. But it is like, it's jarring. It is something that it does bring up sort of loathing, because it's like, man, there's people actually that are cold.
Right.
Right. In Denver, there's people that are cold, and in this Northern is this much money.
Well, so
anyways,
what's kind of interesting to me is, so before we wrap this episode up, this first one on magical clothing, and we're gonna have a much darker episode. The next episode is much darker, but I like it. I think it's gonna be great. the
Way to sell it, Chris.
Thank you. It's gonna be phenomenal. So the idea of like maybe not the brand first. So I like this idea of clothing now though becoming functional again almost, where there are companies that are. I remember. Okay, I have two ridiculous stories. First off, because this is the way this show is happening. When I was in again like. I don't know, middle school, whatever, like another kind of faux pas that I had. I remember I was allowed to pick out my own glasses frames for the first time because my mom's insurance was like really good. And so we went to the store and I got to pick out my own frames. And the frames I picked had this logo on the side that said Head, H-E-A-D.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, these are such cool glasses. I'm just going to get them. And when I went to school, I got mercilessly made fun of because people were like, nice blowjob glasses, Chris. And I was like, come on! I didn't even know that was a thing. I was like 12. I was so upset. Marie. I'm still upset. Anyways.
I think that's a little bit, a slight reach for a pair of glasses. I mean, granted, a grade schooler I can see that.
Listen.
I can see it, but it's like, good God, seriously, people, fucking hell.
I was so mad. Anyways, whatever. So the other story.
There was no magic to be had that day with those glasses.
Those glasses did not protect me from the merciless bullying
No.
I got for those stupid glasses. Anyways, I think it only went on for like 2 weeks until they found some other stupid thing to make fun of on someone else. But whatever. So one thing that I'm thinking of though too is the idea of clothing now. Like you ever, I remember when this first happened to me. We had this guy in my high school who I'm not going to say his name.
Come on.
I'm not going to say his name. No, I'm not going to. But there is there is a story to this person that is like, it's like a half-hour long story and it's amazing. He was involved in like this statewide robbery thing and whatever, and like it was ridiculous. I think he might listen to this show too. I hope if you're listening that it is okay. I'm not gonna say your name, but if you give your consent for me to tell this story, I will tell the story and make it famous because it is a hilarious fucking story. Famous as we can make anything. Yeah.
Like, yeah. You going to Atlantic City with Nona and drinking scotch,
Okay, I have to.
and then the wildlings running through the streets in Halloween, and now you're like, oh yeah, my bud in high school. It was a cross state lines federal investigation into what?
Not even kidding, Marie. Not even kidding. I think he got out for turning state's witness. Not even kidding.
I've never had that option presented to me, and I might take it.
I would definitely take it.
I
would definitely take it.
Okay.
Okay.
Something
anyways,
new, something different. Okay.
So he used to come to school, and
They always put you in Florida, though, so I don't know about that.
No, I wouldn't like it in Florida.
Yeah.
It's fine.
Alligators. Okay, keep going.
Okay, so he came to school one day, and he had on a shirt that was waterproof, and he was like, this kid was super tall and like kind of like had a really deep like weird accent. Like he was just kind of like a big, like imagine like a puppy dog in a human's body. Right? He was just like a big puppy dog. And so
a puppy dog is going to get you arrested eventually, but okay.
So,
Go on.
So like boundless optimism, ridiculous ideas, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so he had this shirt that was waterproof, and it had like a Teflon outer coating to it or something, and it was like bright yellow. And he was like, yo, try to throw water at me. It won't even hurt my shirt. And so for like 10 minutes in homeroom in the beginning of the day, people were just like throwing water at him.
Where are your teachers?
And he was
What's going on with
look,
school?
it just rolls right off. Nothing happens. It was ridiculous. Completely ridiculous. Anyways, the idea of now making clothing that is like functional. So one thing that I wanted to talk about before we finish this episode is the kind of clothing.
That's good, because I can't get beyond like your upbringing.
I'm
your
sorry.
schooling
I'm so
and stuff.
sorry.
I'm tripping out. Tripping out
Not
over
doing
here.
well. There is this like the idea of personal protective stuff or PPE in a lab. And it's like one of the most important things we cover all the time in science, but it's like I don't think people realize just how important it is. But like there are there are goggles that you can buy that are lab safety goggles that will actually melt to your face if acid is like boiling near you and the gas just hits your face, right? Like the goggles themselves will melt. Or I even had a pair of glasses. I had a pair of glasses with some kind of like scratch-proof surface coating that I was doing an experiment and the coating itself corroded and my glasses became useless. Like there's all kinds of crazy stuff with that, but one really scary story that I wanted to tell before this episode ended was there's a compound known as methyl mercury, and it is so it's so easily transported through different barriers and membranes and stuff that it can actually get through the blood-brain barrier and get to your brain and kill you in like a week. You won't know that you're going to die, but you will die. And what it can do actually is it can get through lab gloves. So like, you know, like the nitrile gloves you'll wear if you're in a laboratory, it can get through those. And so
what are you doing messing with this stuff?
No, I don't.
I'm like, why are you handling this stuff?
I don't handle it, but it's
what's doing in there?
It's crazy.
What are you doing with this? What's science doing with this?
People use it for NMR, for nuclear magnetic resonance, I think. And so
oh, no way. Seriously?
Yeah.
How much no, really?
Yeah. And it's and anyways, it
molybdenum? Is it molybdenum?
It's not. No, it's methyl mercury. It's a mercury compound. And anyways, so it's a but it's terrifying, and it can actually get through your gloves and kill you. There was a story, I think I even have told this on the air before. There was a story of a scientist who was pipetting some for an experiment, and some of it got on her glove without her realizing, and she died of mercury poisoning.
This is why we need to put you into witness protection.
Is this why?
Yeah, this is one of the reasons, so we can put you somewhere safe.
Just get me out of rotation.
So you can become like I don't know.
Get me out of rotation here, Marie.
Just get you out of rotation when coming in contact with this stuff.
Ridiculous.
That is scary.
Anyways, all right. So that is the end of this episode on magical clothing. We will be back next week with
more stories of doom and clothing.
More stories of doom and gloom and clothing and pants and all kinds of cool stuff. As always, I am your host, Chris Cogswell. Marie Mayhew is my co-host.
But before we sign out, we should say, speaking of clothing, please go check out redbubble.com and look for Mad Scientist fabulous merch.
Yes, we have a bunch of really cool stuff there. We have
so cool.
It is really cool. It's a really awesome, like a tarot card design, and then all this other cool stuff too with it. We have stuff up on Threadless as always. We also have stuff open or available now, buttons on Not Bad Luck, which is awesome.
So insanely cool. I've got those coming too.
Oh my goodness.
Like I just keep putting. I see all this stuff and I'm like, I'm buying that. I'm like, okay, I should probably slow my roll.
Yeah, no, I got that and a bunch of last podcast buttons too, and I'm super happy with them.
So cool. So go buy some merch, folks.
Buy some merch.
It's magical.
It's gonna be great.
Magical. It's gonna transform you.
It really will. And we will be back so soon in 1 week.
Bye.
Bye.